I am not crazy. You know, those were the defensive, really desperate words of Mr. Henry Chang. He was an 85-year-old Chinese-American widower, and following the sudden death of his wife, he actually went to his doctor. Not for sadness, but for intense physical pain. We're talking headaches, arthritis, terrible insomnia. But when the doctor suggested he see a psychologist for his grief, his immediate reaction was just to completely reject it. He was a respected elder in his community. To him, therapy meant he was broken. It meant he was, quote, crazy. And this powerful reaction? It perfectly illustrates the deep, often totally invisible cultural stigmas against mental health that exist all around us.
So, welcome to this explainer on multicultural counseling. Today, we are exploring a massive friction point in modern psychology, which is why traditional Western therapy often hits an absolute brick wall in our diverse, complex world. We're going to look at why a one-size-fits-all approach to mental health doesn't just fail, it can actually cause real harm, and how the profession is finally learning to bridge these deep cultural divides.
Okay, let's dive right in. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the counseling challenge itself, define multicultural competence, explore the tripartite and multidimensional models, and finally, we'll anchor the whole shebang in professional ethics.
Section 1. The Multicultural Counseling Challenge, when one-size-fits-all completely fails.
To really understand the stakes here, I think we need to build some empathy. Let's consider the case of Mr. Yi. He's a 45-year-old Chinese-American man who is experiencing severe depression and suicidal ideation after losing face at work. Now, traditional Western therapy is hyper-focused on autonomy, right? It's all about teaching the client to be fiercely independent. But Mr. Yi came from a cultural background that highly values dependency and family hierarchy. If a therapist had rigidly pushed Western independence on him, he would have felt completely alienated. Instead, a culturally competent therapist leaned into his worldview. They acted as a sort of benevolent authority figure, and that is what actually allowed him to recover and eventually start a family business.
Next, we have Mariam. She's a woman from Qatar who suffered from mysterious chest pain and headaches for 8 years. In the West, we expect direct emotional disclosure. You sit on a couch and talk about your feelings. But in Mariam's traditional family, openly discussing her marital frustrations or intergenerational clashes, that was completely taboo. Her distress had nowhere to go, so it manifested physically. This is a phenomenon known as somatization. Her therapist had to respect those boundaries, starting with her physical complaints before slowly and super respectfully weaving in the emotional context. Finally, consider the clash between Western biomedical curing, which is super rigidly focused on disease, and traditional healing, which focuses on subjective meaning. In India, a 38-year-old man suffered from DOT syndrome. This is intense anxiety and fatigue rooted in a cultural fear of semen loss. A Western doctor might completely dismiss this or misdiagnose it entirely, right? But a Hindu folk healer successfully treated him using yoga and meditation. It was a culturally congruent intervention that actually worked. Moving on to Section 2, defining multicultural competence, building a framework for the friction.
Because human lives are so incredibly messy and complex, psychologists couldn't just guess their way through this. They needed structured models to guide therapists. But what actually makes a good model? Well, experts agree on 6 critical criteria. It absolutely must be clear. It has to be both descriptive and prescriptive, make a unique contribution, include agreed-upon facets, be backed by solid research, and crucially, it has to balance simplicity with complexity. It can't insult human nature by being too basic, but a therapist still has to be able to literally use it in the room.
Section 3. The tripartite model, the foundation of cultural competence.
I absolutely love the philosophy behind this model because it's rooted in this brilliant Asian proverb. Every person is like no other individuals, like some other individuals, and like all other individuals. Think of identity like concentric rings. The outer ring is the universal level. We're all human. We all experience birth, death, and self-awareness. The center is the individual level, your totally unique genetics and non-shared experiences. But traditional psychology? It often just ignored that middle ring, the group level, your culture, your gender, your socioeconomic status. The tripartite model demands that we look at all 3.
So the crucial point is how this model actually translates into practice, and it does so through 3 interconnected steps. Step 1 is counselor awareness of self. Before a therapist can analyze a client, they have to look in the mirror and confront their own biases, prejudices, and privileges. Step 2 is gaining knowledge of the client's worldview, really understanding their heritage and the sociopolitical forces shaping their life, and doing it without judgment. And step 3 is developing culturally appropriate skills. You have to adapt your interventions. You can't just force a textbook technique onto someone whose culture fundamentally rejects it.
Section 4. The multidimensional model, adding depth to the framework.
Okay, so fast forward to 2001, and D.W. Su evolved those foundational steps into a much more comprehensive matrix. Now, it might seem a little clinical at first glance, but it is deeply practical. Picture a grid. Across the front, you have dimension 2, which captures those core elements we just talked about: awareness, knowledge, and skills. Running vertically is dimension 3, the foci of culturally responsive services. This moves from the individual staff level up to the clinical program and all the way up to the organizational level.
Now watch what happens when we build on this. When we add dimension 1 across the top, we create this fully 3D cube of competence. This new dimension introduces specific racial and cultural attributes: African American, Asian American, Latino, Native American, European American. This 3D model is like a giant puzzle that forces a therapist to pinpoint exactly where an intervention needs to happen. Like, do we need to improve the cultural awareness of an individual therapist working with a Latino client, or do we actually need to address the skills of the entire organization?
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate goal of these models. Cultural competence cannot just stay trapped inside the therapist's head. We have to move outward. We start by addressing individual biases and prejudices right in the center. But then we absolutely must move out to challenge professional culture-bound standards, organizational monocultural policies, and ultimately societal ethnocentrism. Because think about it, it does very little good to train a culturally competent therapist if the clinic they work for actively punishes them for using non-Western healing practices.
Finally, Section 5, Ethics in Multicultural Therapy, the Professional Standard of Care.
At the end of the day, all of these abstract models and moving human stories are ultimately anchored and enforced by overarching professional ethics. The American Psychological Association outlines 5 general ethical principles that every single therapist must abide by. While they are all absolutely critical, pay special attention to the last 2: justice and respect for people's rights' dignity. These are the ethical mandates that enforce everything we've talked about today. They state in black and white that therapists must not impose their own worldview onto clients from different racial, socioeconomic, or religious backgrounds. Doing so isn't just ineffective, it's literally an ethical violation. It is a fundamental failure to provide equal access to healing.
We've covered some incredible ground today, haven't we? From the intense resistance of Mr. Chang to the complex 3D architecture of cultural competence. But I want to leave you with a provocative thought that ties right back to the very first pillar of all these models: self-awareness. I want you to look at the interactions in your own life today. How do your own cultural biases shape the way you view the world? Because before we can truly understand and help others across the cultural divide, we first have to recognize the lens through which we are looking. Thank you so much for exploring this deeply human topic with me today.